So Chorale BWV 7.7 is 7 phrases long, not counting the repeat. And in some ways it's really ambiguous throughout. And because of that, it's interesting and complicated to analyze. So we'll probably break this into steps. I'm not sure how many videos this will turn into, but to go all of it just by sheer length would be well in excess of an hour, and I don't think people like that. So let's do this in steps. We're going to first look at the cadences. It's been arranged line by the cadences, and see what keys they suggest. Okay, so this first one right here has got a B minor chord, and I guess I could just noodle it off to the side here. So it starts with B minor. There's a passing G chord that's made there, and then it becomes a C sharp diminished right there, and then into an F sharp major chord, and then B like that, minor. And this clearly feels like a 5-1. Oh, that shouldn't be diminished. My apologies. That should be just plain old F sharp major. F sharp, F sharp, A sharp, C sharp. Okay. So this is 5-1 authentic cadence in B minor, right? And that would make sense given that we see, you know, the two sharps here, usually key of D major or B minor. And if you look at the last cadence of the piece, right here, it kind of affirms the B minor-ness of it right there. I've got the chords on this written out on the top, and we'll do analysis later. But you start with a G chord, which kind of, if you want to think of the other chord or the other note, is that could be either changing tones / appoggiatura, or you could think of it as just going down and making an E minor 7, which would then go to your F sharp, and then passing note makes it dominant 7, and then we get this Picardy third, modally borrowed 1. And this would sort of affirm the idea that we're in, you know, this is 1, it's modally borrowed. We call it a Picardy third. This is my 5-7 right there. And that clearly says, oh, we ended in B major. So that would make sense, right? We, you know, cadence in B minor. We have final cadence in B major, which is basically just saying we're in B minor, but we'll do the happy ending at the end there. But there's some other crazy things going on here. So like, for instance, if we look here at the second cadence, or second phrase, we have E minor and then B7, which is the dominant to E minor. And, you know, so we're, let's see, where are we here? We're, we got this right? Oh, there we are, sorry. And then here, and this clearly feels like an authentic cadence in E minor, right? So we have 1, 5, 7, 1, and it feels like we're in E minor right there. That's kind of strange, right? And here, at this point, we have a B major chord with an F sharp, so this feels like a 5 chord and a 1 in major. Now, if we were in E minor, you could make a case that, you know, this is a half cadence, but with the F sharp chord that's been modified with the leading tone in here, it feels like an authentic cadence, right? And so this is another modally borrowed Picardy third major 1 chord. And as we play this out, you're going to find that this feels like its own chorale. Right here we have this, then it repeats, and then we come here and we do our B minor ending with the major 1 at the end, which sort of signals the end of all these chorales that he writes in the minor. He does that, and then it pushes on. If we look here, here's another B minor chord with an F sharp 7, that's the dominant. And although there's an E minor chord here, that can be thought of as a 4 chord, or we could be pivoting from the other key. But this is my 1 in B minor, and that's my 5-7, and this is my 4 chord, probably, right? And if we go over to these cadences here, this is the 5th phrase. I have a B7 chord here, which is the 5 of E minor. right? And then I have a B major chord, and it doesn't feel like a Picardy third thing, because this just pushes us over and says this is home, because the 5 chord, dominant 7 chord pushes to a 1, and then this feels like a half cadence. And at this point, maybe we've done so many of these that it's turning around in your ears, and it's hard to hear. But this is like, that feels like 1. And then it says, oh, but wait, we'll go to a half cadence right here, right? It doesn't feel finished. So this feels like 5, 7, 1, and then 5, and it's a half cadence, right? We're in E minor again. And then here, this phrase really feels like we're in E minor. I went through, because the key signature suggests 2 sharps, B minor or D major. And and I'll show you why, because at the beginning, the first chord is E minor, and so you kind of go like, oops, well, I guess we're in E minor. But most of the time there's C sharps in there. And this phrase truly feels like it's an E minor with the lowered C, so it's just 1 sharp. And as we get to here, we have A minor chord, which would be 4 in the key of E minor, and we have a B major chord, which would be 5, and we have an authentic cadence in 1. So it keeps going between these 2 things. I'll just play that so we can say that we did them all, right? So let's see, where are we? There we are. Okay, so we're like, right? Feels like an authentic cadence there. And so we'll have to think about that, because how these things end help us interpret ambiguous chords in the middle. Sometimes they'll be clearly, what key it's in, but sometimes we have to think about, well, it seems like we started in 1 key, but we went to another. I'm going to make a little list on the side so we can keep track of these, okay? So, let's see, keep myself in camera here. Phrase 1 ends with PAC in B minor, right? That's 1. Phrase 2 ends with a PAC, root, and this is the root right there, a PAC in E minor. And this is a closely related key, but it's weird to go here because usually we go to the dominant or the relative major, and this is the subdominant. I think there's a reason for that we can talk about, and there you have your repeat signs, and that's phrase 2. Phrase 3, regardless of where we start, we end up clearly in perfect authentic cadence in B minor, right? But it's got a major 1 here. It's got the Picardy third right there, which is kind of cool. Then phrase 4, down here, we go phrase 4, and it feels like a 4-5-1 in B minor again, and it's also root position, root at top, PAC, and this would be in B minor. Okay, and then over the page, we have a B7 E minor B. This looks like a half cadence. This is phrase 5. The half cadence in E minor, right? Okay, and then we have phrase 6, and we have clearly a root, and then root, a PAC in E minor, right? And then number 7 gives us our final and concluding PAC in B minor. But again, it's a major 1. It's that modally borrowed Picardy third sound that usually signals the end of the chorale when you're in minor. And so it's interesting. This is the Baroque period. We wouldn't expect to see a bunch of periodic structures or anything like that we teach about from the classical period. They can happen, but not as often. Big heap of phrases, right? And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a couple other interesting features, and then we'll cut this one here, and then in the next video we'll start looking at phrase by phrase, given the key that we end up in, how to interpret these chords at the beginning, right? And there's some clues here, and we'll do figured bass and Roman numerals and things like that too. If you're a first-year student looking at this video, you will probably be assigned several different things to think about. You won't be doing or understand every one of these videos, and that's fine. The first thing I would make you do is I would say you've learned how to spell your chords. Hopefully you've learned how to spell your chords. And so you'd see all these chord symbols here, and your assignment would be to do as many as you need to get really proficient at this. It's like if this says E minor, then you would spell, oh, hold on, there we are, sorry. If this says E minor, then you would spell E minor, E, G, B, and then you'd find those notes in the chord. Here's an E, here's a G, there's a B, and there's an E. If I said to you, oh, well, what about this one? You'd say D major, uppercase is D, right? D, F sharp, A is how you spell it. D, D, F sharp from the key signature, and A. So your job would be to spell each one of these chords and get practice there, and then go confirm in the notation where those notes are. So you can go like, oh, yep, that's there. Most of the time, all the notes will be there. Often one of them will be doubled. And the other thing is that you can also say, well, sometimes they're not all there, at least not to begin with. What is missing? What's okay for an incomplete chord, right? That's the thing. Or if we're later on in the term and you've learned cadences, then you will have been assigned to look at the cadences with me and say, well, what is that? And while there are all kinds of cadences, half, plagal, deceptive, Phrygian, imperfect authentic, perfect authentic, all these kind of things, most of these guys are going to be either half cadences or authentic cadences, and then if they're imperfect or perfect authentic cadences. And so you would look at that. And from a point of view of how do we analyze, I just want to remind you that when we get to these cadences, it's most likely a 1 chord, could be a 1 chord if we're in major, right? And then your 5 chord would be this, right? Now, if it's a 1 chord and it's an authentic cadence, you're going to get the 5 chord in some form just before it, maybe a 7, maybe a 1, 6, 4, 5, that kind of thing, 5, 7. And so we can tell that this feels and sounds and looks like an authentic cadence rather than some weird half cadence, right? Because first off, 5 chords, which would make a half cadence, are generally major, and this is minor, so it doesn't sound right to begin with. Secondly, if this is my 1 chord, postulating that, then we would have our 5 chord before it, and there it is right there, F sharp, C sharp, and A sharp, right there. That is going to sound like an authentic cadence. And so you can tell by looking at this and excluding, saying, well, here's my E minor chord. If this is a 1 chord or a 5 chord, well, if it's a 5 chord, it should be, for half cadence, should have been E major, and it's not. So we suspect it's a 1 chord, and if it's a 1 chord, E is 1 and B is 5. And so it's not just remembering the formulas for the cadences, but you can use logic to exclude and come up with ideas for that. Okay? All right, I'm just going to show you a couple other things that are interesting to take note of, and then probably break and do another video where we start looking at probably the first 3 phrases, key structures, that kind of stuff. Okay, and I just want to point out that, yeah, okay, so this is also a first year topic, but good for other people too. See right here at this? This is a unique feature that only happens, not many times in all of Bach's chorales, but you will find them. This here, if we boil this down to a smaller interval, is a B and an F sharp, like that right there. That's a perfect 5th when it's reduced, okay? And if you look here, a G and a D is also a perfect 5th, and you will have been instructed in classes, or if you're reading a textbook, that you shouldn't have parallel or perfect fifths by opposite order. We call them consecutive fifths. Either way, whether they go parallel like this, or whether they start like this and contract in, or this and contract out, 2 consecutive perfect fifths are generally not a good idea, and we count that as an error, and yet we see that Bach has done that. I'm just going to play those for you. It has a specific sound. It sounds, you can just hear it after a while. So here's the first one, and then here. And you hear how it's got this sort of strident kind of sound that's not typical of this kind of writing. So that's a wonderful error to find there, consecutive fifths, okay? Right there. The other place I wanted to point out is this right here. This is an example of cross voicing. It's fantastic, and I'm so, we we should use this as a great example of when would we do cross voicing and why would that be okay. And if we play through here, what happens is your tenor line rises up and has this great art, like story arc that comes up like this and then comes down at the cadence. And the alto starts to move into a bunch of non-chord tones, like anticipations and then suspensions and then suspensions, and they're going to collide just barely. It's not even like, oh, it's excusable because it's good. It's great because this F sharp is right there and collides heavily with the suspended note, which pushes it down even more and creates more tension. So it's kind of silly to play. I'll start right here so you can hear this. Let me see where that is. Let's hear it here. I've got another score on my piano here. So there's the B minor chord and the anticipation, or change to a G chord, and then this here, is it an F sharp minor chord? Maybe. Or maybe that's a non-chord tone and then becomes, there, like that. And then we go to the next one. So we're on the E minor chord right here, and it's got this great non-chord tone there, right? And then this tenor line is going to rise up above there, and we're going to get this nice dissonance. So we get this. If we play the two lines, just the inner lines, you can hear this more clearly. So there's my tenor on the B, there's my F sharp right here, and I'll just play these things through and you can hear them cross over. And then, right? And then they write themselves after, like that. And so technically, from a textbook point of view, we'd call that cross voicing, and that would be a mistake, and minuses on a paper or something like that. But it's great, and it's nice to see. I've heard other people, really, really experienced teachers, when they try and explain this, just say like, that's a rule, but the inside voices are squishy and you can get away with more, and that's true. Although we see times when Bach crosses over, like the soprano below the altos, or the tenors go up above. Sorry, the basses go up above the tenors, and it's brief, but it's it's for the sake of the line. Okay, that's all we're going to do for this one, and I'll do another video where we start tackling the phrases and the keys and things like that, and we'll talk about maybe why there's so much ambiguity between these two things and why E minor and stuff like that. Okay.